As the returning officer for the constituency of Hackney North and Stoke Newington, I hereby give notice that the total number of votes given for each candidate at the election is as follows. Diane Julie Abbott,
Labour.
18,912. And I declare that the said Diane Julie Abbott has been duly...
So a very good vote there for Labour. Diane Abbott becomes Britain's first black woman MP with a majority virtually unchanged over 1983. There were great fears that Miss Abbott's outspoken views would lose votes, but in fact she's held up. The Alliance are up slightly at the expense of the Conservatives.
Has been duly elected to serve as the Member of Parliament for Hackney North and Stoke Newington constituency.
I'd like to start by thanking the Mayor, Britain's first Bengali Mayor. I'd like to thank the returning officer and the counting agents and all the people that worked all day on the polling stations. I'd also like to thank my agent, who couldn't have worked harder. And I want to say that the result tonight is first and foremost a triumph for Hackney North and Stoke Newington Labour Party, who worked incredibly hard and fought a positive campaign. They fought a campaign on the issues, and they fought a campaign designed to unite rather than divide. I want to go on to say that the result is also a triumph for the people of Hackney North and Stoke Newington, who came together, people of all colours, of all creeds, who came together to put Hackney in the history books tonight. I have come a long way to stand here before you tonight. And I am aware that a lot of hopes, not just in Hackney, but across the country, ride on our victory tonight. I hope and believe that I can fulfill those hopes. But I also know that nothing can take tonight away from the people of Hackney. This campaign and this result has been a victory for faith, a victory for principle, and a victory for socialism.
Hello, good evening and welcome to Question Time, the last of this season, for 60 minutes of cut and thrust, of wit and wisdom, in answer to topical questions from our audience here. And around the table with me, the Labour MP Diane Abbott, the first black woman to become a member of the UK Parliament. She's on the so-called hard left of the new Parliamentary Labour Party, and yesterday at the Parliamentary Labour Party's meeting, she welcomed Neil Kinnock's assurance and I quote, that Labour MPs were not expected to put their consciences into cold storage. Miss Abbott was a trainee civil servant in the Home Office, then a trade union equality officer. She is a graduate of Cambridge University in history.
I think that, I mean, I'm a Hackney MP. Now, there's no getting away from it that communities in inner city London, inner city Liverpool, inner city Manchester, Scotland, Wales are facing the most terrible crisis under this government, the government which those people didn't vote for, right? And I think the whole of the Parliamentary Labour Party realises that the first priority now is to defend our people from some of the policies Mrs Thatcher has ready and waiting for them. And I think that anybody at all who engaged in warfare or internecine strife or anything which diverted from defending the people in the inner city, the poor, the sick, the elderly from this government, anybody do anything to distract from that would be criminal.
We are saddled with a permanent Conservative government in this country for the rest of this century, and one of the reasons for it is Diane Abbott and people like her in the Labour Party.
Can you tell?
Well, now they've all finished jumping on the Labour Party's grave. First of all, Cyril Smith said that it's people like me they're going to make sure the tourists stay in, you know, till the year 2000. Let me say this. If Mr Smith believes that having black people in Parliament for the first time is in some sense a backward step, thousands of people that voted for me in Hackney North would disagree with him.
Nothing to do with colouring.
Robin.
Well, if you look at the line which some of the papers were running, you would assume that any black candidate was loony left, but purely by reason of the fact they were black. But to go on, what Mr Heseltine must remember before he starts prophesying the death of the Labour Party, that yes, Mrs Thatcher won, but she won on the smallest share of the popular vote since the 30s, and that isn't a healthy sign for a democracy either. It is no good.
I am Pat Coggins from Hackney Pensioner Projects, and I'm here today with Norman Dennis from the Hackney Pensioners Convention to interview our MP Diane Abbott, to ask her to make some comments on the points that she has in front of her which are of interest to elderly people in the borough. So Diane, do you think that you could perhaps answer some of the questions or discuss some of the points that are on the charter?
But I believe if you put it all together, the British Pensioners Charter is a blueprint for a happy future for Britain's pensioners. And finally, what I would say is this, that we as a country have billions of pounds to spend on tax relief for millionaires and the latest rockets and so on. And I believe that we as a country should be prioritising making the money available to enable our pensioners to lead a decent life, because if so many of an earlier generation hadn't died in the Second World War, many of us wouldn't be around and be enjoying life as we do today.
Yes, I know.
Straightening hair. Hot comb jobby?
Oh yes, I remember hairdressers are a real sort of big feature of a black woman's life. I can remember when I had my hair done for the first time, and in those days you used hot combs and they were heated up over a little sort of paraffin heater. And I went to have my hair done. It was a lady called Carol, who was a friend of my mother's, and she did it in her front room. And I would have been about, I don't know, 15. But having your hair straightened for the first time is a real rite of passage for black women. And hairdressers do seem to take up an inordinate amount of our time.
A public person. But what do you dislike about being a public person?
What I dislike about being a public person is the extent to which you lose your privacy, and also people close to you lose their privacy. I mean, my mother has passed away now, but I can remember times when I was in the papers and she got harassed and she got people ringing her up. And you feel bad about that, because obviously if you choose to go into public life, that's your problem. But when your family get harassed, then you feel bad about that. And also, you know, you do miss having your privacy. I mean, you know, you'll be sitting on a tube train, reading a paper, and, you know, lost in your own thoughts, and you suddenly realise that somebody's looking at you and thinking to themselves, oh, look, that's Diane Abbott. And essentially, funnily enough, I am a private person. And I miss that loss of privacy.
So what do you like about London?
I like living in inner London. I've always lived in inner London. And I agree with Dr. Johnson. When a man is tired of London, he's tired of life.
What is it about London then?
It's the energy, it's the mix, it's the fact there's always something going on. And also Londoners mind their own business.
You sure? No, you're not joking. Diane Abbott, you think
No, but
so?
you can walk in London dressed as you like, wearing what you like, and no one's going to give you a second glance. As if you're in the middle of some rural community. Everyone's talking behind their hands. I love London.
You know what I mean?
I think a lot of MPs can end up living in a sort of bubble because a lot of them, they've left their families behind in their constituency, so they're in London all week. So they're not really taking part in family life. And they're spending all of their day in that sort of rather ornate building. And I think being an MP can cut you off from real life. And the fact that I've got a child, the fact that I'm managing on my own, the fact that I actually live in London, I think makes me perhaps more in touch with real life than some MPs.
Yeah. What about that sort of
Well, the thing about Hackney, the good thing about Hackney is it's a mix. We've got people from Jamaica, we've got a lot of people from West Africa, we've got a very big Hasidic Jewish community, Vietnamese, you've got everybody in Hackney, and it's a mix, which makes it interesting, but makes it a challenge. I mean, what I say is I aim to give the best service that I can give to each and every one of my constituents, whether they're black, whether they're white, whether they voted for me or whether they didn't. And if you come to me as an individual, I will give you all the help I can, regardless of your colour. And you have to, because you're elected to serve everybody.
I mean, now that there are black and Asian MPs in the House of Commons, do you think it's done anything for race relations at all?
I think it's part of a process by which the second and third generation of black people are more integrated in the society. My parents always talked about Jamaica as home and always talked about going home. But I think the second and third generation know that, you know, here to stay.
Mm. So, has it done anything for you know, has it done anything for race relations, having black members of Parliament in the House of Commons?
I think having black MPs in the House of Commons is part of a process by which black and Asian people are now part of British society in a way they weren't when my parents came here in the early 50s. And so I think it has been a positive step. But of course, 4 or 5 black and Asian people on their own can't change the world. But I think it's been a sort of indicator of changes going on. I think when we all first came in, myself, Bernie and so on, I think our fellow MPs, both Labour and Conservative, were really very nervous. They thought we were going to trash the place, you know what I mean? And after a little while, they realised that we were quite nice, really, and we could use a knife or a fork, and I think they've calmed down a bit now.
Talking of black people and opportunities, do you think the children nowadays have, or do you think that black children nowadays have more opportunities than they did in your time?
Oh, I think so. I remember when I was elected, a friend of mine said to me that one of the good things was that she could now tell her 4-year-old daughter, you know, well, when you grow up, you can be a nurse, you can be a doctor, or you can be an MP, because it was like you could actually see a black woman doing it. But I think they do. And one of the things that I do in here is I run a group for black businesswomen, and you'd be amazed at the young black women out there in business, doing all sorts of things despite all the difficulties. There's a lot positive going on in our black and ethnic communities.
What's the positive things about being a woman in politics?
I think the positive things about being a woman is that I think women, on the whole, tend to cope with life better than men. I've never wanted to be a man. I think that being a woman, your life can have so many more facets. And I think women are copers. I like being a woman. I've gained a lot in terms of support and love and affection from female friends and female relatives. So I like being a woman. I've never wanted to be a man. I like men too, but I don't see being a woman as such as being a disadvantage. I think black women in particular